Welcome to the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Glad you're with us. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi, Alain.
Hey, good afternoon, Fred.
Good afternoon. And joining us this time out, from LexisNexis Risk Solutions, Senior Data Scientist and Researcher Gabe Hinton. Hi, Gabe.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Gabe, great having you.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Dick Mudge, Consultant and President of Compass Transportation and Technology. Great to see you, Dick.
Hi, Fred and Alan.
Yeah, always great.
Well, Gabe, you are out with a new analysis of the relationship between advanced driver assistance systems, or ADAS, and U.S. auto insurance claims. Tell us more about what you looked at and what some of the headlines are in the findings.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we looked at a sample of 8.5 million VINs where we were able to determine definitively whether those vehicles did or did not have features within our subset list of ADAS features of interest, and built a model with them exploring insurance loss data with respect to those VINs. The idea being ultimately to, in a general sense, compare cars that do and don't have ADAS, but also at a much more detailed level, looking at how different feature combinations perform together and building a predictive model to help insurers use equipment information about the vehicles that they're insuring to segment their customers and ideally potentially offer discounts and things like that. So we had a similar white paper, sort of a prequel white paper, you could say, some months ago that focused on the impact of ADAS on claim frequency. And that one was highly intuitive, just reinforcing, I think, what people expected, in that the ultimate conclusion was that ADAS does offer improvement in claim frequency. Having ADAS on your vehicle does reduce claim frequency when compared with vehicles that don't have ADAS features. This new white paper focuses in depth on the impact of ADAS on claim severity. And so I would say some headlines that we see here are just that our findings were that severity was basically flat. It technically slightly decreased when you have an ADAS feature compared to vehicles that don't have ADAS features. Then the reason that that's an important headline is that that's not as intuitive as on the frequency side, because on the severity side, on the one hand, if the safety features are functioning as intended, we would expect that collisions likely have a lower force of impact, which could potentially mean lower repair costs because the damage is less severe. However, because this is new technology, often with finicky sensors and things, often in exposed places on the vehicle, then we may expect to have increased repair costs just because of the nature of that technology. So insurers, I think, are at a bit more of a loss here in terms of which of those two views is going to win out. Is the decreased force of impact going to win, or is the repair cost from new highly exposed features going to win out? And then potentially there's concern that if severity does end up being higher, is it so much higher with ADAS features that it balances any insurance benefit we may have seen on the frequency side? So insurers are just asking the basic question, once we look at frequency and severity, can we justify giving discounts? And the conclusion of our white paper is that yes, you can, because what we ultimately found was that if you look at the vehicles in a controlled way, where you're making an effort to compare like vehicles to like vehicles, where the primary variable on which you're differentiating the vehicles is just the presence or absence of an ADAS feature, as opposed to looking at like a variety of makes of models or years, that severity came out slightly decreased with an ADAS feature. It was 1% for bodily injury and property property damage and about 4% for collision. But even if we just summarize that as basically flat, we're already alleviating the concern that insurers have that was that going to cause a severity spike that would remove justification for offering discounts and insurance from having ADAS features. And ultimately, the conclusion of our paper, what we're arguing is that severity does not outweigh a frequency benefit. You can still move forward with offering discounts because of having ADAS on a consumer's vehicle.
For the audience, before we move, let me have you define so we know for the audience what you're talking about. When you say severity,
Sure.
Are you talking about the cost to insurers, or what are we talking about?
Yeah, great question. So frequency, when I say frequency, what I'm referring to is the number of claims that are filed per an exposure. And when I say severity, what I'm referring to is given that a claim is filed, what is the loss amount in dollars of that claim? So when we combine those two views, we get a metric called loss cost, which is basically lost dollars per exposure period. And so to kind of reiterate with those definitions, basically, insurers are already on board that fewer claims are going to be filed if ADAS features are had, but is the repair cost, the dollar amount per claim, is that going to go up or down? And what our paper is arguing is that based on our analysis in aggregate across a wide view, big sample, we're seeing that there is a minimal change, if not a slight decrease in dollar amount per claim.
Yeah, I think that, in the data that I've looked at in the past, which has unfortunately been with transit vehicles and not with cars, because the car data just wasn't available to us. But certainly, I think it's sort of the same thing. And of course, the claim out of the insurance industry is with collision mitigation systems. In other words, seat belts, airbags, those kinds of things that don't affect the really severity. Well, I mean, don't affect the frequency. The severity, as you've defined it, which is the amount of money you have to pay out, has been going up over time. Why? Because you replace airbags, you have to, whatever, and so on. We design vehicles that now crush and go to the junkyard, as opposed to the 55 Chevy that basically was rock solid, but it broke your head open or whatever when you hit it. I'm being a little flippant here, but those fundamental differences. What you're saying, let me make sure I understand, is what you're saying now is with these systems, one finds that even though you may have to replace radars, and whatever, I've hit 3 deer in my car that I never saw before I hit them. And guess what? All 3 of them hit the radar in the front. Okay. And so, of course, the radar, I mean, what would have been, in the 55 Chevy, a $25 charge is now $9,000. I mean, darn dear. Okay. So, that because of those repair costs. But you're saying when you look at the whole distribution, when you take the area under that distribution, you say insurance companies are having less loss for those claims. For those number of claims, when divided on a per claim basis, is less loss on a per claim basis. Plus, there are fewer claims. So you get, or at least somewhat the same on a per claim basis, but given there are fewer claims, there are less. Is that, did I sort of make that summary correct? Or
Yes, absolutely. The only 2 things I would add to it are, first, to clarify a bit about what I'm referring to in terms of the types of ADAS features we looked at. So we're not necessarily looking at things like airbags or ability of the vehicle to crunch. The crunch part is partially true. It comes up in some of the features we looked at. But we're looking more at things like forward collision warning or mitigation, where the car may apply the brakes on the driver's behalf to avoid hitting the car in front of you if you're distracted, or things like that. So things that aren't necessarily specifically with the intent of protecting the passenger, although they can be, but they're a little more focused. The majority of features that we looked at are a little more focused on damage to the vehicle specifically, So we are looking at a subset of type of safety features. And then the other thing I would emphasize in terms of just making sure the claim comes across accurately is that what's really important in the puzzle is comparing like vehicles to like vehicles, doing the analysis in a controlled way. Because if we just in aggregate in our sample compare vehicles that have ADAS features to vehicles that don't, we're likely to see an increase in severity with ADAS features. But that's because we've already introduced a lot of conflating factors, because cars that have ADAS features are likely to be newer, have higher MSRPs, and just things that already are going to correlate with having a higher severity. So we make an effort to do the analysis in a way that accounts for that and controls, so that to whatever extent possible, we're only varying, these two cars are very similar, except this one had the ADAS feature and this one didn't. And that's a really crucial piece of the analysis in backing up the claim that we're making.
Yeah, let me jump onto that, because first of all, I'm very jealous of your database.
Yeah.
Millions of, I can imagine a lot of things to do with that. It's got to be a lot of fun. You had data from 2014 to 2019. Is there any variable change across that? Are newer cars better than older cars? Is there any thing going on? Is ADAS getting any better or not? Or
yes, that's not something we've explored in as much detail, but I do feel confident that we've explored it enough to say that is true. The other thing that changes dramatically, much more obviously, is just that the rate of having, like, the proportion of vehicles that have these features equipped is just skyrocketing as we go forward in model years. So I just recently was looking at, it was a slightly different sample, but it was like ballpark 2016 to 2019, I think. And there we were hovering at about, I believe, a little over 50% had a little over 50% of the vehicles had at least one of what we've labeled our core ADAS features equipped. But if we break it down by model year and just look at samples that only have 2020 or 21 vehicles, we easily break 70%, if not higher. So that's also a major change, that these features are rapidly being adapted adopted, I guess I should say, onto vehicles also.
is there any sense that the ADAS is getting better? Or is it just that there's more of it?
I think both are true. I think both are true. I do think we can back up with data that we do see some improvements in the actual ADAS features over time as the technology improves.
We certainly have been trying to promote the OEMs to improve their ADAS feature. Darn it, why does a car really hit anything in front of it? I mean, maybe a deer that jumps out of nowhere. I'm telling you, I never saw these three that I hit, and so I can't imagine. Physics can't help because they're there, but in situations in which physics can help, being a little bit more conservative in terms of the application. In other words, applying the brakes earlier as opposed to 1.6 seconds to time to collision, and then having all hell break loose in the car when you apply it, which is, some of the design features of some of these things, I think would help. Let me try to ask you about one other potential bias in this. Is there a sample bias associated by the driver? In other words, do you have any indication that safe drivers tend to purchase collision avoidance systems, and unsafe, or let's say people that misbehave driving? Everybody's a safe driver as long as they behave, I claim. It's misbehavior. The tendency to misbehavior, say the hell with it, I'm not paying for that crap, whatever. I mean, I don't know if you can even, begin to deal with that, because you may not have the data that allows you, but do you have any sense for that?
No, I'm actually glad you asked that, because just last week I was part of a talk with a colleague of mine on a highly related topic to what you're describing, where we were sort of exploring how ADAS interacts with telematics data. And the point we were making there was that ADAS data is a highly vehicle-centric view, while telematics data is a highly driver-focused view. So I don't have those graphs with me right now to talk about the data specifically, but just to do my best to summarize it, one of the things that we did was we have a telematics score developed where we're looking at variables of telematics, maybe things like hard braking events and things like that, to try and give drivers some kind of telematics-based score about the quality of their driving behavior. And then we grouped that score in a rank ordered way into deciles. And then we explored, okay, how does the impact of ADAS look across these deciles of telematics score? So it's an effort to sort of cluster drivers into quality of driving behavior, and then looking at now how does ADAS interact? Yeah, exactly. Right. So the first point I would bring up is that it's actually, when I was mentioning earlier, I was looking at like a 2016 through 2019 sample that had a little over 50% equipment rate. That's actually the sample that I was referring to. So it was fresh on my mind. Across those score buckets, across those deciles of the telematics score, we see a little over a 50% equipment rate of at least one ADAS feature, and it's not a trend, and it's not even monotonic. It just seems like minor random variability. The one exception I would add to that is that the very lowest 10%, the lowest decile, the equipment rate of ADAS does drop a bit, about 5 or 6%, if I remember correctly. So it's enough that it catches your eye, but it's not a complete fall off the hill either. But other than that lowest 10%, it stays very consistent. While we may have expected to otherwise see, an increase in ADAS equipment rate as the driving behavior got better, if what you were asking about were true, that drivers are sort of self-selecting for ADAS features. So we don't believe that to be the case. We also went a step further, and then we're looking at just a relativity of if we compare the cars that have ADAS features to those that don't have ADAS features, within each of those telematics buckets, then what do we see? And in each case, the vehicles that had ADAS were performing better with respect to liability frequency, by which I mean aggregating bodily injury coverage and property damage coverage. That in each of those deciles, there was an improvement when you added ADAS. The one exception there is the top 10% bucket, where there was still technically an improvement, but it was very, very slight. But other than that, across the other 9 deciles, notable improvement with ADAS. So it doesn't seem to be the case from the data that we've looked at that drivers are self-selecting based on good or bad driving behavior that they already have.
I'm really jealous of the data you have, because if you have data on an entity in which you have both vehicle data and driver data combined, then you can do exactly what you've been doing. Is you can look at correlations, biases, associated within those distributions, and basically look at really what the combinatorial or the convolving of those two distributions looks like. And my goodness, that's really where we all need to be to understand that. I think Dick and I and Fred, we've been arguing, I guess, since the beginning that the real value of all this automation in driving is really the driver assistance value, to basically reduce the loss and if you don't have a crash, I mean, you don't have an ambulance, you don't have an ambulance chaser, you don't have a body shop, you don't have, I mean, the loss is zero.
Yeah.
I mean, and the insurer, and not, if this really does this and takes you that's a fundamental value to the insurance industry. Now, if that Absolutely. Even works better for people that misbehave than people that behave never crash. Okay, so all this stuff is useless to them. In an argument, if you're a really safe driver, why have it in some sense? Now, of course, they probably all do. But on the other hand, those that sort of, always testing the edge of the cage of the speed limit or whatever, the D going through, not being the first person to be in line at a traffic light going through the red. I mean, for those folks, this stuff really helps, because when they misbehave, it bails them out, I guess. Dick, what do you think?
First of all, I think Alan has a steady stream of PhD students who would probably be your best friends for this. I know.
Yeah, I mean, if you can share the data, man, we'd love to get it. Okay.
Yeah, I don't. I've already checked that box. I don't see any value in getting more than one PhD, but otherwise, I would love to work with it. I assume the people who pay you for this are the insurance companies. What has their reaction to this been? Have any of them said, we're going to use this to change how we price, how we evaluate, or
Yeah.
you don't mention any names, but be curious to know what they're the people that really count in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right that we're hoping that this, makes an impact on the insurance industry and keeps pushing them to implement ADAS into their rating plans at a deeper and deeper level. So I guess I would start answering your question by talking a bit about where our view of where the insurance industry is currently based on conversations that we're having. And we see some variety. So we see some insurers that may just kind of ask the consumer vaguely about, do you have an ADAS feature, or perhaps they specify a feature, do you have a blind spot warning on your vehicle or something like that? And then just based on the consumer's answer, may tack on, some kind of slight discount. And I wouldn't argue that that's useless, but it certainly is perhaps limiting, leaving some potential benefit on the table. Some insurers, have maybe identified just one or two features that they felt were easy enough to get good data on whether or not it's on the vehicle that they're insuring, and or insuring based on that. The model that we built, the white paper of course elaborates, but the model that we built includes 11 features that we sort of describe to insurers in our conversations with them as the core ADAS features. So we have our data has more than 60 was our starting point. And we have had insurers who seem to have said that they have found some benefit from features outside of our core 11, but generally in our own internal analyses, we just see a pattern where we can kind of narrow it down to about 11 that seem to most consistently appear as notable in our analyses, and also have a good balance of just intuition, because of course that can be important with ratings, or insurance rating regulation and things like that too. There needs to be an intuitive element where if I tell you this feature has a positive impact on insurance, that if that leaves you scratching your head too much, regulators aren't going to be on board with that, with good reason. So a good balance of these are popping up significant a lot, and they're good intuition. And I guess I'll list those now, which are forward collision, warning and mitigation varieties, rear collision, warning and mitigation varieties, lane departure, warning and mitigation varieties, blind spot, warning and mitigation varieties, adaptive headlights, adaptive cruise control, and driver monitoring, which people may also know as like driver attention alert. So those are what we label as the core ADAS features in our conversations with insurers. And so if they want our guidance on where to start, that's usually the nudge we give them in the right direction. And so we do have data products available that to help insurers know what features are on their vehicles, because that is a difficult process, having that detail of data. So we do have products for that for insurers, and those conversations are at different points. Some are implementing, some are looking at just still retros on their book of business, where we sort of guide them about, give us a sample of your book that looks kind of like this, and we'll append variables and show you what it looks like on your customers, and then have conversations there. And to be honest, I have forgotten your original question. I don't know if I answered it.
I guess one question: are the insurance companies paying you more money now? Now they see all the data.
It is a gosh, I'm not sure.
Just say we're doing just fine, thank you.
We're doing fine. We're doing fine.
Can you tell from one other question? Can you tell from this which ADAS characteristics are most cost effective? What's the benefit cost ratio? But which ones perform the
Give
best?
the most impact. Yeah, the reason that question is really complicated is because, especially on newer vehicles, it gets more and more rare that if a car has one ADAS feature, that it only has that ADAS feature. So we really quickly need a multivariate view, or maybe I could word that alternatively as a view that accounts for interaction effects. Because if we're just looking at distinct univariate effects in our model, then the coefficients, not to get too mathy, but the coefficients get a little bit toned down because the model has to account for cases where that's the only ADAS feature on a vehicle, and for cases where it's one of 7 ADAS features on a vehicle. And for example, if you have 6 ADAS features and you're adding a 7th on a particular VIN, that impact isn't going to be that improvement isn't going to be quite as substantial as if you're comparing a car that has no ADAS and then adding one ADAS feature to it. So it's a difficult question to answer because we used a multivariate model specifically for that very reason, that it's a difficult question to answer because of those interaction effects and because of the rarity of actually having a vehicle that truly only has one ADAS feature on it. So we use a decision tree that can account for those interaction effects to understand not just what a feature does by itself, but also what it does in tandem with other features that it's often grouped with.
You're basically using
Elon Musk wants to get into the insurance business. Has he called you guys up?
No, he hasn't called us up. And we do have Teslas in our sample, but naturally, them being not that much of the market yet, they don't make up a very substantial portion of the sample that we've looked at. And that,
the
of course,
interesting thing is that he's only giving his very best, newest technology, if we call it that, the newest full self-driving, to the very, very, very best drivers. The top, I don't know, you have to score 99 or 100 for him to let you have it, even though you've paid for it. So any thoughts about that?
My thought on that is just that it creates the nature of Tesla being so much more autonomous than even the level of ADAS features that we're finding in other makes almost creates a whole different issue. So I long term, I think that once those get a little more prevalent in the market, that may even constitute an entire analysis to itself, just because some of the Tesla's features are so much like doing so much more than even just like what I described as forward collision mitigation, So I almost suspect that ultimately that may end up being an entirely different beast that needs an entirely new analysis.
And if you're giving it to only those few drivers who have applied for it more or less and have earned it, then the numbers are going to look pretty good for you, I would think.
That
for
absolutely
Tesla
does
going
introduce an
forward.
issue for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a great
but,
point.
some people,
Let me ask
some
you one more
people-
question. Do you actually believe this stuff? That is, is this data, have you changed what kind of cars you buy based on this?
It's been a while since I personally have made a new vehicle purchase. I'm currently driving an 09, which is, and generally our ADAS views, we're often isolating 2014 and newer. It has impacted the type of vehicles that I consider in the future. In terms of, I certainly, I don't know that I want to get too specific about this on air, but just because I'm mixing in my own personal preference with the data, but it certainly has given me insight into like, oh, that does seem like something that would give me peace of mind. Like one I feel comfortable specifying, just because I think it's obvious, is that the forward collision mitigation, my current car, my 09, doesn't have anything even resembling that. I do think that when considering purchasing a vehicle in the future, just speaking as me personally, not on behalf of LexisNexis, but just me as a personal individual, I do think I have a more specific interest than I might have otherwise in having forward collision mitigation, because I think doing these analyses has given me some peace of mind about the impact that it can actually have.
If I may offer a suggestion in case you didn't look at it, but I think that and again, these are personal feelings, that the automated collision avoidance systems, the ones that are on all the time that you don't turn off, that turn on when you turn the key, are substantially different than the ones that somebody can turn off, and even the ones that are just warnings. Okay. And especially the warnings that can be turned off, because I think I have no data to support it, but I'll say some behavioral aspects is you get a couple beeps and you turn the damn thing off. Okay. And somehow you get aggravated, or some people get aggravated, which to me seems like, we should have regulations to do this, but since none of us want to be told what the hell to do, that goes vaccination too. No, I mean, you almost can't do that, but the systems that are on, and I think also the backup aspects, originally, there was just a camera, but you had to, I mean, if you weren't going to look in the mirror, you're going to look at the image. No, but finally some folks decided to put automated backup stopping systems. Why? Because you're just going very slow anyway, and even if it breaks, that's not a big thing, and you're not on the New Jersey Turnpike going backwards at 90 miles an hour. But in terms of then, not running over kids, which is the real fear of any of those things. I mean, it seems as if those guys are no-brainers. Okay, they might cost something. And it's probably, to me, if you have the opportunity to do the analysis, you're probably able to show that the cost benefit on that probably suggests that the insurance company should, whenever I walk into a showroom, my insurer should be there. Hey, I'll pick that up for you. You pay your premium, and we'll buy that for you. Why? Because its cost is less than the expected liability savings associated with having the darn thing on there. And I think some of these things are finally finding their way to be that. And in fact, as you suggest, in some cars, they're not standard equipment. Holy hell, Mercedes finally, it took them until at least 2021, if not 2022, to make the 997 package standard in the S-Class. Holy hell, why wasn't that standard, 5 years ago, in a sense, when you're paying that much for a car. But, when there is an incremental cost, I think we've argued, Dick and I have argued, Fred and I have argued that, in fact, one should be able to determine what the expected liability savings is of each one of these, or each bundles of these things. And in fact, I know it's against the regulatory aspects of insurance companies as to what they can discount, what they can give if you then purchase insurance. Why? Because of course insurance companies have to maintain money to be able to pay when you have a crash and things like that for very good reasons. But my goodness, here, the insurance agent almost should be in the showroom with the purchaser of a vehicle, helping that person not only save their lives, but also, make it affordable. And especially if you're buying a car for a 16 or 17-year-old, my goodness, what's the I guess, I don't know, if you have 16 or 17-year-olds in your sample, if you have their age, man, love to see would I love to have your data. Go all over that sucker. But yeah, I mean, there within that cohort group, probably this stuff it's got to make an enormous difference. Maybe. At least that's my speculation on this. Dick?
I guess I was going to ask you, one potential bias that occurs to me, if some of the ADAS really works, meaning it prevents accidents, they won't appear in your data. You're only looking at data of places where there have been crashes.
Oh, no, I thought you said you had all VINs. You had a bunch of VINs and VINs in which there were no crashes too, right? No or no?
We do.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Dick, what? Yep. I think.
But I thought you were analyzing places where there have been crashes and then seeing the effect of ADAS either as being having an effect or not. But there may be places where a car just, had many fewer accidents, and that's missing data.
We do actually have insurance policy information where, and because we know the exposure period, we are including vehicles both that did and did not have crashes in the sample. Where I think maybe I may have been a little confusing is that what you're saying is true for the severity piece in the sense that we're talking about the dollar loss given that a claim occurred. But in the frequency portion, we're talking about the number of claims in an exposure period, which includes vehicles that had 0 claims during their exposure period. So we do have both of those perspectives covered.
We'll be back with more, but first on that topic too. But first, this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, look for a white paper. It's called The Smart Transportation Revolution. You'll find it under the Insights and News tab. Some great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. You may know that ETFs can be a good way to spread risk with investments, maybe focus on a particular category of stocks. The website again is motoetf.com. We're back with more of Smart Driving Cars and our guests, Gabe Hinton from LexisNexis Risk Solutions and Dick Mudge from Compass Transportation. Gabe, I guess this goes back to something Alan was just talking about, and Dick as well. What the analysis that you've done shows is that ADAS features really can lower what insurance companies pay out, if I'm reading this correctly. It sounds like then, as a customer, I want a cheaper premium. So tell us what you're seeing. And Dick asked this before: is the response from the insurance companies that we're going to provide lower rates for people who own these vehicles?
Yes, and some companies are already introducing that in preliminary ways. Companies are in very varied stages of implementing ADAS into their rating plans, and some are interested in a high specificity of data so they can get really detailed in how much granularity, how much segmentation they can do within their customer base to offer a variety of discounts, while others are just sort of dipping their toes in the water and just kind of asking the consumer to answer on their own, do you have such and such ADAS feature, and then offering a nominal discount from there. One thing I should add, I'm going to forget the specific citation, unfortunately, but I believe it's in the white paper, that there was a survey that someone put out about asking consumers, what are the reasons for your own personal interest in ADAS features? And of course, the highest one was just their own personal safety. But the very second reason that they have an interest in ADAS, according to the survey, is because of potential insurance discounts. So our impression from speaking with insurers is that generally insurers are pretty aware that this is a direction that consumers are believe it makes sense to go. And so we're really just trying to back up, confirm that, yes, those of you who are just dipping your toes in the water, you can keep going. It's safe. We have data that can help you do that in a smart way, in a productive way that benefits everyone.
And they should be promoting it too, right? To their customers.
Yeah, absolutely. We already see to that point, it's kind of interesting to me how much I do think we see a lot of commercials these days about telematics data where, whether it's a smartphone app or some kind of attachment to the car where the insurer is saying, hey, we're offering you this, where you can potentially get discounts if you connect that data to us. I haven't seen a lot of that with ADAS yet. And that does kind of surprise me that I personally, at least, have not just out in the world looking at commercials and marketing and such. Yeah, I agree with you that I haven't seen that a lot yet. A lot of like, hey, if you've got safety features, come to us because we're prepared, to give you discounts. So yeah, I agree that I believe that there's more room to go that direction.
Well, yeah, again, Dick and I and Fred have been sort of looking at the insurance implications of this technology for some time, both in the transit industry, the car industry, and also the trucking industry. And may ask you a question about the trucking industry in a minute. But out of this, it seems, and if you have the data, it seems that you might be well positioned to basically become the good housekeeping seal of approval, if I may call it that, and if not violating any, who knows what and saying it. But, I'm an academic, so I say anything, whatever. People already know that. But really being out there and in a sense, if one manufacturer or a group of manufacturers are actually implementing this ADAS stuff better than others, that in fact, you putting out data that basically of the both frequency and the severity piece in there, and just putting it out as data, all of a sudden you're the Consumer Report again, violating whatever trademarks and so on, but you can become that, and that's, to me, would be extremely valuable to the consumer to trying to understand that, because some of these are better than others, and we've known from IIHS had been friends of ours for some time and shared us some of their videos of their testing of some of these things, and NCAP in Europe, the same thing. Some manufacturers do a credible job. I'll mention Subaru's, in 12 and 24 mile an hour, tests, they don't hit anything. Other people reduce the speed by 2 miles an hour. So instead of crashing at 12, you crash at 10. Cut it out. You can't even stop, reduce 12 miles an hour. They should be taking the task for this. In other words, get the darn OEMs to compete on this to make it really good, because until they have an incentive and until the customers are going one way as opposed to another way, what do they care? They can just, put anything, not that they would ever do that, but I think you're in a great position to do that kind of thing and be an enormous service to consumers. And there are a lot of new car buyer consumer and even used cars, same deal with used cars.
Alan, moving along a little bit here, a big week for some related news, the signing of the infrastructure bill, and today with the president and GM CEO Mary Barra on hand, the official opening of what is called Factory Zero, which will produce a variety of all-electric vehicles and the Cruise Origin autonomous vehicle eventually. This is all at what was once called the Detroit Hamtramck Assembly Plant. And I spoke with Assistant Plant Director Kathy Steelgrave, and she called this day really special.
The people here at this plant that thought that their plant was going to close, they had to go to other GM sites to just work temporarily. And now we were able to call them back. Many of those people are legacy GM employees. So their parents or grandparents also worked for General Motors. Myself, my dad and my grandfather both worked for General Motors. So when you grow up in a manufacturing space, in a manufacturing family, in a manufacturing town, there's things that you're used to. And this is taking what we're used to and making it so much better with doing things that we knew we should have done all the time. We know we should have a world with zero crashes if we can help support that, a world with zero emissions and a world with zero congestion, which is really what our vehicles are doing. They're supporting that.
So she mentioned all the things that we've been talking about here. A world with zero crashes.
And a world with zero emissions, and a world with, when we ride share and so on, zero congestion. Absolutely. We understand all that. But I think, the other thing, the other person we need on this is we need those that generate the electrons. And we're going to need a whole heck of a lot of electrons. And so we need public service gas and electric to be on here, and Atlantic City Electric and all the other electric producers, because somebody better start worrying about where in the heck all this electricity is going on. I tell my class, my mother always taught me to turn off the light. and never thought of, heating up my room more with an electric heater, put on another sweater. And all of a sudden now we're going to, move around with electricity. Somebody better create some more electrons.
Time to get busy. Another headline, Transportation Secretary Buttigieg spoke with Yahoo Finance Live and said, we've got to make sure these technologies as they roll out are safe, and we have to have clear communications with drivers that no matter how sophisticated or smart your car is, any car you are acquiring on a market today in the US requires that you are behind the wheel and paying attention. And I guess you'd say here, here.
Here, here. Any car that we're going to buy, any car that's sold to a consumer, absolutely. I mean, we're just way too irresponsible as consumers to be able, I just send my car down to Dick and say, hey, Dick, you can use it. And I just let her go. I mean, cut it out. I mean, that's like, where'd SAE ever come up with that? Now, with respect to now creating vehicles that provide equitable, affordable mobility, high quality mobility to people who've been left behind by the current automobile, that's a different story. And that's done by a responsible entity that's now managing a fleet that provides mobility. And, if Washington doesn't get on board with that, we're going to do it here in New Jersey.
I think it's interesting to hear the Secretary have a comment about autonomous vehicles, because the infrastructure bill does not even mention autonomous vehicles anyplace.
Right.
It's like they don't exist.
Right. And so there is that those of us that have been, calling for the creation of driverless vehicles, in fact, have said, we don't need any infrastructure. Just give us some paint and a smooth surface. And that's what we need as humans to be able to drive well. We don't want anything more. And I think that still stands.
Well, you mentioned trucking a little bit ago and maybe getting Gabe to comment on it, but story today, Gatik and Walmart announced that Gatik is operating daily without a safety driver behind the wheel on its delivery route for Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas, moving customer orders between a Walmart dark store and a neighborhood market in its fleet of multi-temperature autonomous box trucks. Gatik, by the way, is going to be joining us for a podcast in the near future. We're looking forward to that. But your thoughts about this, Alan, and maybe we'll
absolutely. Well, you know which question I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask. Okay, there's nobody behind the wheel. Is there an attendant on board?
I think they're saying no.
Well, I don't think they said
on this specific route.
I know what
they. Oh, you mean a safety driver is different?
I know how to parse the English. I know how to go to the dictionary and get definitions. But they did not say they don't have an attendant on board. And how closely are they really watching each of these things remotely? More power to them. Love it if it's true. Absolutely, kudos all the way around if it's true.
Yeah,
so
I've seen video of these guys talking with Walmart. They may not have said it quite the way you'd like them to say it, Alan. They certainly imply very strongly there's nobody else in the vehicle.
I agree. But my goodness, I've seen so many of these things that have implied it so much and so on. And guess what? There's somebody in the back seat with a. I don't even want to go there. Okay, and the Photoshop whatevers that are out there, and it's on a highway that's not been opened. I mean,
their CEO will be joining us.
I'm just trying to,
Well, at least I don't think there are hills in Arkansas for them to coast the truck down the hill.
Yeah, right. And there's Nicola too. So I mean, we look. Most unfortunately, some people have stretched the use of the English language and so on to try to basically, I guess, get some investments in their companies. But my goodness, if they are out there, I'll applaud them. More power to them. We know that Waymo is doing it without anybody in the vehicle in Chandler under normal conditions. Chandler, Arizona doesn't become very abnormal, but but that's fine. I mean, that's still normal conditions. Hey, come to Trenton, baby. We'll use it.
Alan, you had a question about trucking that you wanted to get.
Yeah,
engaged in?
have you gotten any data from trucking? I've some of my students in the past have gotten some data from trucking companies. The sort of the tough thing with trucking companies is a lot of them are self-insured. At least they're self-insured, at least for most of it. They have some sort of whatever for the tail of the distribution and get some reinsurance out on the tail, but much of it is self-insured. And I like to claim it's the CEO knows, because he or she, it comes out of their pocket when each one of these liability claims that comes on. And sort of the numbers that we've sort of dug around here in terms of liability claims per class 8 is in the order of $20,000 a year type of thing as an average. Again, those are numbers that we've looked at and had data on. Have you had a chance to look at any trucking, and what's the situation in trucking companies with respect to ADAS?
Yeah, that's a great question, but unfortunately, no, we haven't really gone that direction much. Our data is really focused on personal vehicles still. As a company in general, we have involvement in the commercial insurance space, but we haven't really done much with ADAS for commercial specifically at this point.
Yeah, I think, and one really wonders to the extent that there's anybody really selling much of that yet in that space. You sort of get some press releases here and there, and somebody's trying whatever, and so on and so forth. And I've even commented that with, of course, I've commented that with Tesla coming out with a Class 8, I can't imagine Tesla's going to put a Class 8 out on the roadways without autopilot and maybe full self-driving. I mean, why not? I mean, they've got the stack. They can make it work maybe just as well in a truck as they can with their cars, or just as unwell, depending on which direction you're looking at this thing. But I would suspect they'll be out there and force on that. I mean, that this is the way Elon sold electric vehicles, and saying, hey, you both get the EV and all this automation. That in fact, he claims exactly the kinds of things you've claimed with these things. The frequency goes down and the severity goes down. Unfortunately, he hasn't given you or me the data that we could actually do an independent analysis. I'd love to do it, okay? Or I'd love to if I got it, I'd like to give it to you to do it, or we could do it together. But love to do that. It's a shame that he doesn't, okay? Because I suspect that stuff, it is good. You can't misbehave with it. You still have to pay attention. I mean, come on, not perfect. But boy, I suspect that stuff is good. I don't know, maybe.
Let me ask a very general policy type question. If our goal is to reduce crashes, knowing the data that you have, what policy should government think about, industry think about? Are there certain ADAS devices that should be encouraged? Are there certain things the insurance companies should do with changing prices to get people to buy more of certain vehicles? Is there? I don't expect you to come up with a single bullet here. Yeah. But is there a family of things that we should be thinking about?
I do think that I don't know about evaluating the appropriateness of the speed at which they're doing it, but I have seen some of government policy enforcing, if I remember correctly, I think you guys may remember this off the top of your heads better than me, but I believe forward collision currently on new vehicles is now legally mandated. Is that correct? Or is it just soon? I believe there
was an agreement with the OEMs to do it.
I think the OEMs volunteered to do it by 2021 or 2022. They had a big meeting 3 or 4 years ago to do that. Gotcha. And the last thing that was mandated by NHTSA, again, somebody correct us if we're wrong, was the electronic stability control of all vehicles. And again, electronic stability keeps me from losing my rear end because I'm going around a turn too fast. I mean, and it's on all the time. And I don't I mean, it may be turn offable. Maybe there's a wire that I can cut someplace, but I have to be a real,
Well, there is something, I believe, in the infrastructure bill to prevent people from being able to drive after they've had too much to drink.
impairment. Yeah, but nobody thinks that that's ever going to really. I mean, yeah, and we can't. This is America. Nobody telling people what to do is just. It's just like when they put an interlock. If you didn't have your seatbelt fastened, your car wouldn't turn on. That lasted about 2 seconds. People went nuts and they went backed off on it. So again, I think you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. And in this case, maybe you can make them drink. What you've done is I think bring out some very salient data on the fact that these things are good for individuals, and some folks should, I think at least part of the marketplace will respond to that. And I think part of the OEM space will respond to that and say, my goodness, we have an opportunity to get more customers if we do this better. Not that they're not trying. I'm not suggesting, please, I'm not suggesting that. Of course, I'm not suggesting that. But these are all good. This is all good. Do you work with IIHS or how do you, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, or have you gotten involved with those guys and gals there?
Me personally, no. I don't want to say for sure that company-wide we don't, because I think it's possible that there are people in our company who are having conversations with them, but I personally don't. So yeah. I'm not really involved in this conversation.
Well, we do appreciate all of your insights. Gabe.
We've had them on here. They're a good group, for whatever that means.
You've mentioned 2 white papers you guys have done. I think they're both very good. I mean, they have data in them. They're easy to read. They're a nice job. What do you do next? What's your next big thing you guys are working on?
Good question. I think our next step is, some of your questions were aimed at like how are insurers responding, and so I think a lot of our next work is just that, having those conversations with insurers now that hopefully are initiated by the white paper about, okay, giving them some advice based on our analyses about how they can respond, how they options for considering beginning implementation and what that can look like, to hopefully get this more widely adopted in the industry in a wider way. I think that's the immediate next step.
I mean, can you imagine if Flo and the get-go started promoting their customer set to buy vehicles that will keep them alive and keep them from help keep them from crashing and help. I mean, can you imagine what that would? I mean,
I can
all
write
of a
that
sudden
commercial.
that motivates the whole field. I mean, that motivates everybody, and it should help them get more customers. I mean, and if you can empower them with data that allows that, it seems to me that that's a great marketing opportunity for Flo and the get-go.
It is.
Well, let me mention one other thing. Alan and I have done a couple of reports for the Society of Actuaries, which we'd love to be able to have maybe more detailed access to some of your data. I think the actuaries would love to have it.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, because they're the ones responsible for trying to figure out how in the heck to price all that, what the expected line. I mean, the beauty of insurance is you take money in up front and you hold it until you have to pay it out. So therefore, the whole business is being able to forecast what the expected liability is going to be in the future. Non-trivial thing to do. Non-trivial thing to do. But boy, the better you're able to doing that, guess what? The better you're able to price, the better you're able to build your book of business, the better you're able to have a good insurance company that then when you do crash has the money to, take care of you, as opposed to gone bankrupt because they didn't know what the heck they were doing. Not that anything to do. I don't misunderstand any folks.
Gabe, we want to thank you for taking the time with us and for
really
all of your insights and the work here. Terrific. And you too, Dick.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and we really appreciate your work. We think it's fine work, and that this is not easy to do. simply because, the data, there are privacy issues all over the place on this stuff and so on. And it's just not available out there in the public domain. Washington doesn't have it. They don't have a mandate to collect it. And we really appreciate your work here and really commend you on what you've done.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
There's more on the analysis at risk.lexisnexis, LexisNexis.com. Thank you to our sponsor, the Smart ETFs, Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO. More information is available at motoetf.com. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, wherever you turn to for podcasts, really. You can get your smart speaker to play us too. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alain Kornhauser. Thanks for listening or watching, and please stay safe.
And have a great evening, everybody. Thank you.